and frequent evaluation of programs and projects. Using the strategy as the base document, Dominica Vision. Our Public Sector Investment Program, or the PSIP, which is the budgetary mechanism used by government for allocating funds to capital projects, is fully aligned with the SDGs and our resilience targets. Every project that is considered for inclusion in the budget must identify how that project contributes to the achievement of the SDGs and the targets in our CRRP. So one of our projects, for example, is the Housing Recovery Project, which impacts the CRRP target of 90% of housing stock built or retrofitted to resilient building codes. And this supports SDG 9, 11, and 13. We're also able to identify how many projects under the PSIP supports the achievement of a CRRP target. For example, for target 10, which is sustained, sustainable, and inclusive growth of a minimum of 5% achieved, there are 52 projects in the PSIP contributing to that target. A similar exercise can be done to determine how many projects support particular SDGs. We have found that a structured approach to resilience is necessary, and therefore a strategic planning framework was developed for the PSIP. We adopted the CARICOM results-based management system for the public sector to help government to achieve great efficiency and efficacy of projects. This helps to enhance cross-ministerial organization and facilitates better planning for future initiatives and strengthens monitoring of targets. We spoke earlier of the importance of monitoring and evaluation, and so to ensure efficient and effective delivery of our sustainable and resilience goals, a comprehensive monitoring and evaluation system for the PSIP is being developed. And this will ensure that the PSIP is a major driver of national development. It will help promote better evidence-based policies and enhance the designs of projects and programs that support prioritization of projects and improve development results in a quicker time frame. A digital M&E platform for the PSIP would also allow for improved data collection, generation of real-time data and information, compilation of lessons learned, and conduct of regular evaluation of ongoing projects. This really is critical, as one of the significant challenges that we face is the accessibility, availability, and reliability of data. And I think everybody understands that. It has been repeated here more than once this afternoon. So it's not unique to Dominica. It's a challenge that the region faces. Working with the ministries, we were able to develop indicators or metrics against which progress could be measured and the necessary data collected. And we also developed with the ministries a schedule for reporting. Importantly, we were introduced to an electronic decision support platform for strategic planning and capital allocation. And this electronic scorecard supports the operationalizing of our strategic plans. This enables us to do a number of things. The scorecard enables us to objectively evaluate and score any proposed project against strategic goals and objectives, such as the contribution of a project to the achievement of the SDGs or the CRRP targets. And this helps with prioritizing projects. It also helps our ability to track progress towards those targets, as the data captured by the ministries who are reporting regularly on the indicators can be fed directly into the scorecard so that we can monitor how close we are to achieving our targets to 2030 and where the gaps are. It also improves the ability to generate reports related metrics. That means that we are better able to track and report on initiatives and projects, and it helps in addressing the lack of reliable data. Ultimately, we are seeking to create a center for excellence for data in resilience decision making that will allow for data capture, analytics, and management. This will inform strategic planning, facilitate investment decisions, help in the evaluation and implementation of programs and services to improve the lives and livelihoods of persons. So I want to end now by reiterating that there are a number of factors that inhibit the ability of our small states to achieve the SDGs. And these include our inherent vulnerabilities, both external and internal, high debt, mainly related to responding to climate related disasters, lack of fiscal space to implement reforms and undertake key initiatives, and access to affordable finance, among others. Notwithstanding all of these challenges, it is important for countries to ensure that our planning process is appropriately aligned to the SDGs and to our resilience goals, and that we improve our data collection abilities to effectively monitor, report on, and appropriately direct scarce resources towards achieving our targets. I look forward to the discussions that will follow. Over to you, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Francine, for that insightful intervention. And it just goes to show, especially in the region, how climate affects the achievement of all of the other SDGs. You mentioned your National Resilience Development Strategy, and that was very interesting. You talked about how every project must be defended against its contribution to the SDGs, and you mentioned the whole notion and the importance of monitoring and evaluation. What is obvious to me is that we are pretty much converging around a set of common themes, even though you're all approaching it from different experiences and different sectors. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to invite the audience here, and of course the audience online, to ask any questions of any of the panelists. I think we have a mic. We have a mic, so you can either raise your hand or line up behind the mic. And of course, our online audience is also invited to ask any questions of the panelists. But while we wait for, I see we have a question from Sarah Valero online, and Sarah is asking, how does Republic Bank plan to incorporate resilience or adaptation into their climate change agenda, and what specific activities? Everything mentioned by the panelists was mitigation focused. I guess that's a question for you, Richard.
By a process of elimination. But I think it's an excellent question, and I think it may tie to Ian's comment, even though it was a bit tongue-in-cheek in terms of Republic Bank operating at a different level and not necessarily the commercial and retail banking level. And perhaps we could have that conversation. And it's really a matter of drilling down. So at the public sector level, we of course continue to be a lender to regional governments and government entities, and drilling down to suppliers and companies that work with those entities. But more specifically, we plan to actually have the ESG and the SDG approach integrated into our existing model, into our existing products and services that we share and offer to the corporate, commercial, and individual clientele. And as a matter of fact, we're in the process of ensuring that SDG and ESG is not seen as a parallel strategy. We believe that it has to be intertwined into the DNA. And so, for instance, corporate, commercial individuals that are seeking, for example, that are seeking a home loan and willing to go the route of applying renewable energy will benefit from preferential terms, from preferential rates. We do have it, just to showcase an example, currently in Barbados, where there has been an agreement with the government, the tax entity, the renewable service provider, and Republic Bank, where if, for instance, an individual wants to install solar technology on their residential home that is installed by the provider, plugged into the grid, there are tax implications and rebate benefits. And of course, the bank waives certain fees, gives preferential rates. And so that is how we really reach everyone across all levels at a macro, corporate, commercial, individual level. And we also have a focus on micro, SME. We really have to ensure that this is fully integrated along the chain. And ideally, you want to get to a stage where it's utopic to have that ecosystem fully working and supporting the entire process. But really, that is how we intend to ensure that it becomes integrated into the entire business model and all of our product and service offerings.
All right. Thanks. Thanks, Richard. While we wait for additional questions, I'm going to put all four of you out on a limb, and I'm gonna ask you. I mean, look, we're all of us are heavily invested, obviously, in the achievement of the SDGs. We believe that these goals are critical, but we recognize, of course, that countries, especially in the region, are lagging. And I want to ask you, despite our efforts, all of our efforts, what do you perceive to be the probability of us reaching these SDGs by 2030? And if there are any doubts, if the probability is less than 1, what do you think needs to be done to accelerate the pace at which we are going? And of course, you can feel free to call out. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know who wants to take that first.
I'll take a shot, but I think we're all discussing in our presentation the issue of capacity building.
Mm-hmm.
And regardless of what your interventions are, you want to put a measure, all countries to measure whether in truth and in fact you are reaching the Sustainable Development Goals, whether you're reporting. I mean, Dominica gave us some excellent ideas in terms of what they are putting in place in Trinidad. You talk about the National Development Strategy, the roadmap, but at the end of the day, I think one of the most important things has to do with capacity building. That has always been one of the challenges in the region, and in the budgeting process in particular, to have that alignment with the SDG goals. Now, as to whether or not I can say what are the probabilities of us getting there, the truth is that, I mean, we're now in the month of June, and for every island in the Caribbean, I mean, your thought is June going all the way down, that's the hurricane season. And when you think about what happened with St. Vincent, with the volcanic eruption, and the fact that almost every year there's some island in the Caribbean who is likely to face some kind of impact of a hurricane, we know that there are those challenges. And the question for me really is whether or not in the as it relates to the 2030 agenda, the issue of the vulnerabilities, the resilience, and the challenges that small island development face will actually be considered. We have seen that with the COVID pandemic. It's one of the interventions that nobody thought about. And it's 2 years, it's continuing 3 years. And while some countries can take the decision and say, okay, we are going to move forward regardless of what, we understand the way that we have been set back. So we, in addition to the COVID that is going to take away probably 3 years or more, we have to consider the fact that virtually every year we will have those challenges in terms of our vulnerabilities, issues of climate change. And that for me is a real challenge, and that therefore is critical in determining whether or not we are going to meet the 2030 agenda and the sustainable development goals. As it relates to taking a guess, I'll probably leave that for the banker. Go next.
Sure. Thank you, Minister. And I will probably have to run a detailed business financial model in order to produce a percentage. I won't hazard a guess. But just to add to the points that you're making, I agree certainly.
Sorry, Richard, you don't need the mic. I think
Okay,
it's
fine.
only
I'm working, okay. Just to make the point on capacity building, I'd also like to add in there a couple of points. One is the coordination and standardization along the entire process. And that is as simple as being reflective of the legislation in order to allow collaborations, partnerships, in order to allow technology providers. Important as well is going to be digital transformation in order for all of us to get to a certain critical mass, especially if we're talking about data analytics and information sharing and target setting. And again, certainly our experience operating across 14 plus territories is that each one of us are at different stages of that digital transformation process. We're at different stages of infrastructural development. We're at different stages of supportive legislation in order to meet that 2030 agenda. And that is where I suppose it's less about the discussion of the existing challenges and more about moving towards execution and moving towards implementation. We are all aware in this room and everyone online of who we are and of what the region needs to do. And I think it's a matter of working with best practice entities that have already gone down this road and really not transplanting, but adopting some of the best-in-class techniques that can work for our region. We certainly can't do a transplant of our model into Grenada or into Trinidad and Tobago, into Jamaica, but certainly being able to customize some of those international and regional leading practices. And we don't have to look very far. We just have to look at our neighboring countries to do it. And I think that is what will be the real crux, that execution and implementation to drive us there.
Thanks, Richard. You know, one of the things that we've been hearing certainly over the last 2 days, but even before that, in this business is about implementation challenges and capacity deficits. And you know, I think that is certainly, I do agree that that's certainly a critical issue facing the region with respect to the achievement of the SDGs, but also measuring the SDGs. And as far as measurement is concerned, Kathy, would you like to make a comment on the issue of capacity? Or the broader question that I posed? Hearing you.
For whether or not the probability of countries being able to meet the SDGs. But I think in terms of data, from the data perspective, we have to try always to remember, I mean, the SDGs are there for a purpose. The purpose is to improve people's lives, to really lead to development in countries. And I think the important thing from the data perspective is that countries need to own their own development. They need to understand the data. And I think this is something that Francine noted in her intervention, is that things can happen on a local level, on a national level, which can completely throw all the plans and everything that you decide to do from the beginning, into just a complete mess. So you need to be able to have robust systems that can measure what is actually happening on the ground, and this means and I think something that the minister said, real time data that can really be used to follow the situation for people, for people's development. And I think that these are the kinds of systems that we need to try to build, and in terms of addressing capacity, I mean, this brings in a whole range of different new capacities that are needed for I think I heard the word digitalization. We're talking about different kinds of data that can be brought into the system to actually support kind of traditional data sets, but also something as simple as building civil registration systems, which we saw, with the COVID-19 pandemic, that these kind of basic systems aren't in place in many countries, and they really need to be, if we're going to be able to see how things are going for people on the ground, and really respond to the differing needs, the changing needs, and these kind of crises that come and go, and unfortunately will probably continue to come and go. So for me, I think that's really the key, actually getting these systems in place to be able to respond to the changing needs. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that, Kathy. Now, we talked about strategies, we talked about plans, but we also talked about vulnerabilities, and we are aware that in the region in which we live, a natural hazard event can put paid to all of those beautiful plans. I don't want to ask you to talk about the probability that that a natural hazard event is going to destroy the plans that we're making. That, I think that's a conversation for tomorrow. But let me ask you to talk about the possibility that the region, specifically Dominica, hits the SDGs by 2030.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ian. I don't know that I necessarily want to hazard a guess or suggest for the region, or necessarily even Dominica. It really depends on a lot of factors that are outside of our hands. With all things being equal, if there were no COVID, if there was war in Ukraine, if we're not hit by a hurricane over the next 7 years left to 2030, there is a possibility that we can achieve the SDGs. Certainly, we are heading towards that in our planning. Our planning is targeted particularly at us being in a position to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Again, this is affected by external factors that are beyond our control. But I should say to you that there are things that can be done to better prepare us for achieving the SDGs. The question of access to financing, for example, is one of the areas of great need. The access to affordable financing in a timely fashion. There are a number of initiatives that we have to undertake if we are to meet our targets. And that requires us to have access to adequate financing, whether it is to undertake initiatives that help with enhancing our resilience or infrastructural resilience, or whether it's to undertake and support our efforts at economic diversification, which is a key pillar for us to be able. We saw what happened in relation to COVID-19 and how that impacted on countries in the Caribbean that were heavily dependent on tourism. So there is an imperative for us to diversify our economies in the region, and that requires us to have the necessary financing, the necessary human resource capacity, and it requires skills development. We spoke about the digitalization or creating a digital economy that requires us to retool our people and to have and pursue a deliberate program towards establishing a digital economy. We can consider ourselves large ocean states. How do we develop in a sustainable way the ocean resources that surround our islands? So there are a number of factors that I think our countries are already um, taken into account, and we're already on the process of very deliberate action to achieve the SDGs. But ability to do so can be impacted by events around us, and therefore I can only say that if we are given the space to be able to pursue some of these initiatives that many of our countries are already pursuing without these external factors impacting on us, then the SDGs are achievable. But it does require there to be a system that allows for um, adequate um, adequate space to develop, and I perhaps will just stop here and pass back on to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francine. A very important issue you raised there with respect to access to finance and, of course, access to appropriately priced finance. I think that is absolutely critical. We have a question from the audience.
Good afternoon. Lamika Williams, Department of Environment and Coastal Resources, Turks and Caicos Islands. My question is for climate action. As we talk about climate action and the SDG goals, but we also have, as small island developing states, thinking about the 1.5 degree sea level, temperature rise. We're talking about the Paris Agreement, all these things that we will have to become in line with. How do we reconcile the SDG goals as well as these other sort of requirements or necessities within our planning, budgeting, et cetera? How can we put those in perspective given our limited capacity and availability of funds?
Thank you very much for that question. Any of the panelists want to tackle that question? Any takers? All right, tell you what, I'll give it a shot. Okay, you go ahead, Madam Minister.
Of course, for a country like Trinidad and Tobago that has been dependent on fossil fuels, when we have been in the oil and gas sector for 100 years and more. And for us, therefore, that whole issue of the 1.5 and the whole issue of emissions as a small island development state, and you are considered to be, one of the, serious emitters, based, of course, on the calculation. So yes, you talk about that for a country like Trinidad and Tobago, together with the issue of the climate action, and as I talked about the vulnerability and the resilience. So that's why I mentioned earlier when the question arose as to whether or not we are going to meet those SDG targets, especially as small island development states. Have they really considered all those challenges that we face? And they talk about the Paris Agreement. We have seen what has happened COP25, how there are apparent some reversals. You look at some changes in relation when they talk about coal and the elimination. Some people are saying, well, maybe that may not have been such a good idea. So the truth is, I believe there must be continued collaboration, and the CDB has been doing a lot of work in terms of assisting with capacity building, as well as assisting a number of countries to understand this critical challenge as it relates to climate change and climate action. So I think your question is absolutely spot on. What it requires us to do as a Caribbean community, and islands that definitely have the vulnerabilities every single year, that it's not scientific, it's not mathematical. And even though you have a situation where people have been able to forecast certain things, you have a wide period where you have hurricanes, and you just one morning you just hear a hurricane is coming, and the level of preparation for us is extremely challenging, especially like for an island like Turks and Caicos and others who are clearly a lot more vulnerable. So I mean, collectively, as Caribbean islands, I think we have a responsibility to take a position collectively that clearly indicates that we are not in the position like other countries that can, in some ways, easily meet their targets. And for us, it's almost as though you're reversing, and then you're going forward and you're reversing. So I really believe that it puts us in a very, very challenging situation, but it also gives us some opportunities to ensure that we make some very bold statements as it relates to the challenges that we encounter.
Thank you, Minister.
I think
Francine,
many of our countries in the Caribbean are looking at the opportunities available for clean energy, whether it's wind, solar, ocean, and in Dominica's case, geothermal. We have, and there's also ocean technology that one can look to as well. So there are opportunities for us to utilize clean energy not only to meet our requirements and obligations under the Paris Agreement, but to utilize it to create economic opportunities for people as well. Where speaking specifically for Dominica and perhaps other countries like St. Vincent and probably St. Kitts and Nevis and Grenada may have geothermal and have the opportunity to transition to a green hydrogen economy, which can be beneficial to them for their industrial development. These are areas that we can look to that helps not only in meeting our commitments, but also creating new opportunities for people as well. Thank you.
thanks, Francine. Yeah. So the question spoke to or started with the whole notion of climate, but it also talked about the competing development needs, and I think that that is an important topic. The SDGs, of course, cover 17 goals, requiring obviously significant resources, but they're all very important. And I think that that is where budgeting processes that are efficient comes into play, in the sense that it's really about properly identifying what is necessary for the country to move from where it is to where it should be in 2030, doing all of the analysis that is necessary to identify the theory of change that gets you from where you are to where you want to be through the activities, the outputs, the outcomes, and those SDGs, and properly prioritizing your expenditures to make sure that you achieve a reasonable match between what you're spending and what you want to achieve. So I think that that's fundamental, and this is why the budgetary reforms are so critical, because ultimately resources are scarce and resources have to be used properly, right? So I think that all of those things are extremely critical, and improving the budget processes are, is very important. Let me ask Richard, though. We talked about carbon, and I know that the European Union has implemented a carbon tax, and of course, you have oil exporters growing prominently in your portfolio. So I want to ask you, what are the potential challenges that you think are faced as a result of that carbon tax?
Thanks, Ian. I think it's a very valid and timely question. And essentially, the carbon tax set by the EU really taxes the carbon emissions or the cubic carbon emissions arising out of energy and oil-producing states. And so, for instance, the countries in the region that come to mind, of course, Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname, Guyana, and within our portfolio as well, there's a tie to Ghana. I think it's going to be critical for the private sector companies operating in those industries to really get that measurement right, and that measurement will impact their bottom line and also their corporate citizenship in adhering and pushing the SDG and the ESG agenda. And in the developed world, there are implications as it relates to the value of the company, to the share price, to attracting investment, and really valuing those companies. And we have to almost adopt that type of approach in order to ensure that we adopt that responsibility that the minister was speaking to. You also have the Basel Committee and Banking Supervision that recently came out with 18 climate risks that are being put forward. And of course, while it's attracting a lot of different views from different players and stakeholders, it is the start of the conversation that we need to have in order to get to a point of policy adoption. So it will, in fact, land squarely on those operators in order to adopt that and build that into their business practices.
All right, thanks for that, Richard. Kathy, you mentioned the need for the upgrade of statistical legislation as one of the steps in improving data. And I want to ask you, what has been the experience in getting countries to upgrade their statistical legislation? What are the challenges in that regard?
Yeah, I think the legal challenges to building these systems that really work together and take this holistic approach that we've all been talking about is required for measuring the SDGs. These challenges are very real. I mean, there need to be very many things in these legislation. There needs to be a clear mandate to bring these stakeholders and data producers together. There needs to be strong enough provisions to allow access to the data that is existing, to be able to use it, to provide the statistics. The provisions need to be wide enough to allow access to different types of data. We've all spoken about collaboration, so we need to make sure that it's possible to collaborate when it comes to data. But on the flip side as well, there needs to be this strong privacy legislation to ensure that individuals and enterprises are protected, and that the trust in the
Apologies, but of course you can ask the question though. But we're not no, it's all right. Oh, sorry. Oh, I didn't realize. Sorry. Yeah.